Maria and Tom start investing on the exact same day with the exact same amount of money. For the first 15 years, Tom feels like he's winning. His account is bigger, his friends are impressed, and Maria's progress looks embarrassingly slow. Then something happens around year 16 that nobody warned either of them about, and by year 30, Maria's account has pulled so far ahead that Tom starts wondering if his numbers are broken. They're not broken. He just never understood the one moment where compounding stops behaving like addition and starts behaving like an explosion. Let's find that exact number today with real math. Let's keep this fair. Maria and Tom both start with $10,000. They both invest at a 10% average annual return, the long-run historical average for a total stock market index fund. The only difference is what they do after that starting point. Tom adds $500 a month, every month, without fail. Maria does something that looks, on paper, much lazier. She adds nothing at all. She puts in her $10,000 once and never touches the account again. If you had to bet on who ends up richer, every instinct says Tom. He's the one doing the work. He's the one showing up every single month. Maria is just sitting there. For the first few years, Tom's instinct looks completely correct. In year 1, Tom's account is worth about $17,000, mostly because of his $6,000 in fresh contributions on top of modest growth. Maria's account is worth about $11,000, just her original $10,000 growing, at 10%. Tom is already $6,000 ahead, and he hasn't even started counting the years where this is supposed to get interesting. By year 5, Tom has put in $30,000 of his own money on top of the original $10,000, and with growth, his account sits around $52,000. Maria, still untouched, has grown her original $10,000 to about $16,000. Tom is winning by more than 3-1. If you showed these two account balances to 100 people and asked who made the smarter decision, all 100 would point at Tom. By year 10, the gap looks even more decisive. Tom has contributed $60,000 of his own money across the decade, and with compounding, his account is worth roughly $107,000. Maria's original $10,000, still never touched, has grown to about $26,000. Tom's account is more than 4 times the size of Maria's. At this point, if Tom were bragging about his strategy at a dinner party, nobody would argue with him. The math, so far, looks completely one-sided. Here's the part almost nobody tells you. Every single dollar in an investment account behaves differently depending on how long it's been sitting there. A dollar that's been compounding for 25 years is not the same as a dollar that's been compounding for 2 years, even if they're sitting in the exact same account earning the exact same rate. The older dollar has had far more time for its own gains to start generating gains of their own. This is the part of compounding that doesn't show up cleanly on a graph until you specifically go looking for it. Tom's account is almost entirely made of young dollars. Every single month, he's diluting his portfolio with a fresh $500 that hasn't had any time to compound at all. Maria's account is the opposite. Every dollar in it is exactly as old as every other dollar, and all of it has been quietly compounding since day 1 with zero interruption. Let's watch what happens next, because this is where the story starts to turn. By year 15, Tom has contributed $90,000 total, and his account has grown to roughly $195,000. Maria's original $10,000 has grown to about $42,000. Tom is still ahead by a wide margin, more than 4.5 times Maria's balance. If the video ended here, Tom would be the obvious winner, and this would be a very short, very boring lesson about the power of consistent contributions. But we're not done. We haven't hit the number yet. By year 20, Tom has contributed $120,000 of his own money, and with growth, his account sits around $344,000. Maria's account, still just that original $10,000 compounding alone, has grown to roughly $67,000. Tom's lead has grown to over 5 times Maria's balance. At this exact moment, in year 20, if you asked either of them who made the better decision, the numbers would still say Tom, loudly and clearly. This is exactly where most people stop paying attention to compounding, because it looks like the story is already over. It isn't. Here's the number. Somewhere around year 24 to 26, depending on the exact rate of return, something shifts that neither Tom nor Maria can see happening in real time because it happens gradually and then all at once. This is the point where the annual growth generated purely by Maria's compounding, the interest earned on interest, starts to exceed the entire annual dollar amount Tom is contributing through his monthly deposits. At a 10% return, Maria's $10,000 becomes large enough that a single year of growth on it alone produces more new dollars than Tom's full $6,000 a year in contributions. Once that threshold crosses, Tom's monthly discipline, the very thing that made him look like the smarter investor for 2 decades, stops being able to keep pace with what Maria's money is now doing entirely on its own, without her lifting a finger. Let's put exact numbers on that crossing point. By year 25, Maria's original $10,000 has grown to approximately $108,000. In that single year alone, her account grows by roughly $9,800 just from compounding, no new money added. Tom, in that same year, contributes his usual $6,000. For the first time in the entire story, the growth happening inside Maria's untouched account in a single year is larger than the total amount of new money Tom is physically adding to his account that year. Tom is still ahead in total balance at this point, sitting around $565,000 compared to Maria's $108,000, but the direction the story is moving in has permanently flipped. From this point forward, Maria's account doesn't just grow. It grows faster every single year because the base it's growing from keeps getting bigger, while Tom's contributions stay exactly the same $500 a month they've always been. By year 30, the picture looks completely different than it did at year 20. Tom has contributed $180,000 of his own money over 3 decades, and with compounding, his account has grown to approximately $986,000. Maria's original $10,000, untouched for 30 straight years, has grown to roughly $174,000. Tom is still ahead in total dollars, but look at what happened to the gap. At year 20, Tom's lead over Maria was more than 5 times her balance. By year 30, Tom's lead has shrunk to about 5.6 times, and it keeps shrinking every single year from here, even though Tom never stops contributing. The reason is simple. Tom's contributions are linear. Every month adds exactly $500, no more, no less, forever. Maria's growth is exponential. Every year, the dollar amount her account grows by is larger than the year before because it's calculated as a percentage of an ever-expanding base. Let's fast forward to make the point undeniable. By year 40, Tom has contributed $240,000 total, and his account has grown to approximately $2,660,000. That's an extraordinary result, built entirely on consistency. Maria's original $10,000, still completely untouched for 4 full decades, has grown to roughly $452,000. Tom is still the larger account. But here's the number that should actually stop you. In that single 40th year alone, Maria's account grows by more than $41,000 purely from compounding, while Tom contributes his usual $6,000 in new money that year. Maria's untouched $10,000 is now generating more new wealth in a single year than Tom's entire annual savings habit, the habit he's maintained faithfully for 4 decades straight. This is the number the title of this video is pointing at. It's not a single universal year that applies to everyone because it depends on your rate of return and your contribution size. But the mechanism is exact and it's predictable. The moment arrives when this year's growth on your existing balance, calculated as a percentage, produces more new dollars than you are capable of adding through new contributions. At a 10% return, that moment shows up for most realistic starting balances somewhere in year 20 to year 25 of consistent investing. Once you cross it, your account stops needing you nearly as much as it used to. Before that point, your own contributions are doing most of the heavy lifting. After that point, the account is lifting itself, and your contributions become a smaller and smaller percentage of the total growth every single year that passes. Here's the trap in how people usually talk about this. They say compounding is slow at first and fast later, which is true, but almost useless as advice because it doesn't tell you anything you can act on. The actual useful version is this. The years before the crossing point are not wasted years. They're the years where your job is to survive, to keep contributing even when the account looks embarrassingly small compared to what your effort deserves. Tom's first 10 years, where he was contributing $60,000 to end up with $107,000, looked like a mediocre return on paper. But that early capital, sitting there compounding quietly in the background, was doing the invisible work of building the base that would eventually explode. If Tom had gotten discouraged at year 8 and stopped contributing because the numbers felt slow, he never would have reached the crossing point at all, and his account at year 40 would look dramatically different, closer to Maria's modest $452,000 than his actual $2,660,000. This also explains why starting early matters so much more than people initially believe. Every year you delay, starting doesn't just cost you that 1 year of contributions. It pushes back the date of your personal crossing point by roughly that same amount, sometimes more, because you're delaying the moment your base becomes large enough for its own compounding to outpace new money. Someone who starts at 25 with modest contributions and someone who starts at 35 with larger contributions can end up in dramatically different positions by retirement, not because the second person tried less hard, but because they simply had less runway before their own personal explosion point. Let's also talk about what happens when you change the starting balance, because this is where the number gets personal instead of theoretical. Everything so far assume Maria started with $10,000. Say a third person, James, starts with $50,000 instead, invested the same way as Maria, untouched, same 10% return, same monthly $500 comparison against Tom. James's crossing point arrives dramatically earlier, somewhere around year 12 to 14, because his base is already 5 times larger on day 1. By year 12, James's $50,000 has grown to roughly $157,000, and that single year of growth alone, about $14,200, already exceeds Tom's $6,000 in annual contributions. Compare that to Maria, who needed nearly a quarter century to reach the same crossing point starting from a fifth of the capital. This is the part that should reshape how you think about lump sums. It's not just that a bigger starting number grows into a bigger ending number, obviously true. It's that a bigger starting number reaches the explosive phase of compounding dramatically sooner, sometimes a full decade sooner, simply because it needs less time for its own gains to outrun a fixed monthly contribution. This also means the crossing point isn't a fixed law of investing. It's a simple ratio between two things, your existing balance and your contribution rate, and you can shift it in either direction. Increase your contributions, and you push the crossing point later, because Tom's side of the equation gets harder to outpace. Add a lump sum, an inheritance, a bonus, a home sale, and you can pull the crossing point dramatically earlier, sometimes by years, without changing your monthly habits at all. This is why financial advisors often say a windfall is worth more early than late. It's not sentiment, it's math. A $30,000 windfall invested at 30 reaches its own explosive phase years before the same $30,000 invested at 45, purely because it has more runway before whatever monthly contribution you're comparing it against. Let's be honest about the other side of this, because a 10% average return is not a promise. It's a long-run historical average, and real markets don't move in a smooth, predictable line. There are years where the market drops 20 or 30%, and in those years, both Tom's and Maria's accounts shrink, sometimes badly. Sequence matters too. A market crash in year 2 feels very different from a market crash in year 35, even if the long-run average ends up the same. And taxes, fees, and inflation all quietly eat into these numbers in ways this simplified model doesn't fully capture. None of that erases the underlying mechanism. It just means your personal crossing point will wobble around depending on the specific years you live through, not the tidy, smooth curve on a spreadsheet. So, what do you actually do with this number? First, if you're early in your investing life and your account still looks small compared to your monthly contributions, that's not failure. That's exactly what the years before the crossing point are supposed to look like. Second, the single most powerful thing you can do isn't necessarily increasing your monthly contribution, even though that helps. It's protecting your existing balance from unnecessary withdrawals, because every dollar you pull out early isn't just that dollar. It's that dollar and every year of compounding it would have generated for the rest of your investing life. Third, understand that your crossing point is a moving target that gets closer every time you avoid touching your principal, and every year you stay invested through the boring, unglamorous middle stretch where Tom looked like he was winning, and Maria looked like she wasn't doing anything at all. Maria never contributed another dollar after that first $10,000, and by year 40, her account was quietly generating more new wealth in a single year than most people save in a decade. Tom never missed a single monthly contribution for 40 straight years, and he ended up with a larger total account, built almost entirely on discipline most people never manage to sustain. Neither one of them is the hero of this story, and neither one of them is wrong. The real lesson is what happens when you combine them, when you keep contributing consistently the way Tom did, while also understanding that somewhere around year 20 to 25, your money starts pulling more weight than your paycheck does. That's the number where compounding stops rewarding effort and starts rewarding patience. And once you know where it is, the boring years in between stop feeling like wasted time. They start looking like exactly what they are: the setup